we also had a moment where software engineers were either like superstars, and the Elon Musk and even, I don't know, Zuckerberg was looked at as this like cool, funny, weird geek. And you had these geeks who were also billionaires and kind of did all this amazing stuff. But then you didn't look at kind of the other side of it, of the darkness and it's not only the darkness, the good enoughness, the sort of, it's not flashy, it's not amazing, it's not great.
Welcome to This Anthro Life, the place where curiosity meets depth in discussions that matter. Today, I'm thrilled to have Paula Bialski join me. With years spent dissecting the nuances of software culture in Berlin, Paula brings an unparalleled insight into good enoughness that shapes technology and work life. This is a concept you may or may not be familiar with. What's interesting is that Paula's research challenges the false narratives that we get from Silicon Valley, that technology is just this relentless pursuit of innovation, and invites us to explore the values of things like maintenance, care, and the human element in our high-speed and high-tech world. So stay tuned for a conversation that's bound to shift your perceptions.
Paula, really excited to have you on the podcast. I enjoyed your work and enjoyed your book and middleware, and then also excited to talk with you about all things around software development and good enoughness and good enough culture. But just starting off by saying thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, no problem. My pleasure. And you said middleware, but my book is called Middle Tech, which is kind of important. But it's important because middleware, It is a little bit about middleware. So that's not like it's not about that. But yeah.
That's true. My brain just kept going to the word middleware for some reason.
Yeah, maybe it should be
totally
called.
Right. Sorry.
It should be called middleware. We should stop the press. We should tell the publishers. Yeah.
Pause. Wait.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting point, though, because it's like obviously a middle tech company that's working on software development, so obviously where the tech and the where
definitely
kind of come together there. But I think, what's really compelling about this, across it, there's a ton of things I want to dive into, but obviously there is this like main idea around good enoughness, right?
Yes.
As a kind of overarching theme. And this is something that for the deep audience, deep listeners, I guess, I did a conversation with David Gray-Witter and Don Naffis a few months ago that was about kind of software modularity and like a bit of the production process. Cool. And it was interesting. That's one of the things that David, who was a computer scientist and now is doing his graduate work in anthropology, was kind of talking about and reflecting on this idea of, when software engineers are working, especially in bigger organizations, if they're doing kind of an agile process or even old school waterfall, that they are, each individually kind of responsible for a part of the software. But they don't necessarily see what happens downstream.
Definitely.
And his argument was kind of about this question of responsibility. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know what it's doing later. Not that I don't care if it does harm or good. But so folks don't have to listen to that episode to go here, but that's just kind of one of the places I was thinking about with this, like, because obviously this theme of good enoughness is really interesting, of like software is good enough to get out, to get shipped. And so I was thinking about that in relationship to this question of responsibility, of what happens when it goes out. That's a bigger question, but I'm going to ask that. But then I also want to kind of think about what is good enoughness in the first place, for folks that they're trying to get a sense of what's happening here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess my book touches upon two worlds of good enoughness, and that was the tricky thing to maybe for myself to try to organize my own field work. I spent 2 years at this software company in Berlin, and after a while, I noticed that two good enoughness. One at play is the good enoughness of software. That software is patchy, kind of ship it out at not a perfect stage, but it's good enough to go, right? And it can have bugs, but those bugs can be fixed later. And I could talk about that good enoughness, and I'd love to talk about that, the good enoughness. But another good enoughness is about really a work culture. So kind of in the whole anthropology of work, sociology of work, sociology of corporations, it's kind of like that situative ethnography of what it means to push back against a narrative of excellence at a company, right? Or a narrative of excellence that we all work under the sort of this like capitalist machine of that being perfect, being great. How many times a lot of our students come up to us and are super sad about like a bare minimum, the sort of like, or a median grade or something, and you're like, hey, this is good enough, it's fine, right? But so we're all living under that, whether that's our students or us or everyone, just in our society. And I think that this is also an example of how good enoughness can be stabilized as a culture of doing. It's not even doing the bare minimal. It's doing, so it's the good and the enough. I take those two words quite seriously. So do you see? So there's these two forks, and I talk about them too, sometimes simultaneously. Sometimes one is an example of the other, and sometimes you could take a few chapters and speak to one and speak to the other for a form of good enoughness. Yeah.
Yeah. No, cool. I think it's such an interesting theme. Yeah. And I appreciate the way that you split those up, or it is like part of it is the software itself. The other part is the work culture, which I think is really important, right? Especially because, and you mentioned this a few times in the book too, but just we are reeling, I think, societally from the Facebook mantra of like move fast and break things, right?
Yes,
That's like been the Silicon Valley tech bro, speed demon, innovation at all costs kind of thought process. And so good enough is a nice, interesting foil to that.
Yeah.
Did you notice that? Is that something that you've seen as kind of a reflection response? Because you're working in Germany, right? So we're kind of not in the US Silicon Valley. So it's like, is there kind of a European difference there? I mean, I don't like attribute it purely to culture, but maybe it is, or is it like, what else is happening here in terms of like why that difference seems so pronounced?
Totally. So maybe I'll even back up, Adam, and talk about my fieldwork happened in kind of 2016, 17, 18. And these years, for those of us who don't remember through some COVID fog brain or something, then before, we were living in a tech environment where there was only a bit of skepticism starting to bubble up, but you still had these like the superheroes of tech, the Silicon Valley mecca of like, as you said, move that fast and break things. We had sort of, I think it was the peak at the time of a lot of social networks that we were using. It kind of was just starting to be formed. There was forms of skepticism, which we already have around data privacy, around social media and what they're doing to us, what they're doing to young people, blah, blah, blah. We get the whole, the critique that we are living in now, but that was only starting to like trickle up at the beginning, right? When I was doing my fieldwork. And another thing is that we also had a moment where software engineers were either like superstars, and the Elon Musk and even, I don't know, Zuckerberg was looked at as this like cool, funny, weird geek. And you had these geeks who were also billionaires and kind of did all this amazing stuff. But then you didn't look at kind of the other side of it, of the darkness and it's not only the darkness, the good enoughness, the sort of, it's not flashy, it's not amazing, it's not great. So, but also I did my fieldwork at first I went to the Silicon Valley, right? I went and I was there for a summer, and I was just interviewing a bunch of people on a different project that I was working on. And I kind of felt, for those of us who did fieldwork in the Silicon Valley, we know it's a very weird and very specific place that is very technologically solutionist. They love technology. They believe in technology. They also, America, in my opinion, as a non-American, I'm a Canadian, has a work culture that is about really excellence and drive, and you can do anything, and about meritocracy and all these things that a lot of, I think, European work cultures don't have. And it also reflects itself in even the labor laws in Germany and in a lot of countries in Europe. So I lived in different countries in Europe, but I did my fieldwork in Berlin, and I met some expat Americans even who used to be in San Francisco and kind of were saying, I just can't handle it anymore. Or you had Brazilians who lived in San Francisco and then also moved to Berlin because they really thought, this work culture is not for me. I can't take doing this, working from morning to evening, or even just trying to really fully believe in our technology, and you constantly have to like repeat slogans of the company and wear company hoodies and be excited about the like company culture. And work is not everything in a European maybe context. And I know that's a very big stereotype, but I noticed the stereotype a little bit at play in my field. So I'm jumping different topics, Adam, but I hope I answered your question, that I think there was a good enough environment, I think, in a European environment and work environment that lent itself to good enoughness. So did I answer some of your question today? I don't know.
Okay. Definitely, yes, yeah. You're great, because like we'll rabbit hole around different ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's a really important point. And it's like, I'm not trying to draw too stark of a contrast there, but I think it's like, for the US oriented audience, right? Just kind of pointing out, and the myth of Silicon Valley that we've heard globally, it's like it's global mythical place.
Totally.
And to your point, it is this very unique cultural kind of zone. And so there's that, again, I'm saying this also because this is kind of when I was coming into your work, like that's where I was thinking about from this idea of the Silicon Valley perspective. And so I also felt a lot of resonance with this idea of good enoughness as a form of resistance almost, right? In terms of, to managerial practices but also to bringing forward things like care, and so I appreciated the way that your work both kind of brings us into like science and technology studies, but then also into like work practices and ethics of care, and how people navigate those different parts of the world. And so I want to make sure we spend some time on the software development itself, because I love all the bigger questions too as part of this, because I think that's something else. But like, so let's just walk through a little bit of like how good enough happens in middle tech, right? And so in this case of like both, some areas that stood out to me was thinking about software as a social process, right? And this also links to the again, think about the conversation I had with David and Don before about the idea of modularity in software development, but you approach this in actually in a quite different way, which I like. And so thinking about the social dynamics, that how this impacts the way that people do software in the programming team, but also amongst managers. So let's kind of start there. And like, what does it mean that software is a social, like a kind of a social process?
Construct, practice, whatever, socio-technical object, whatever you terms, buzzwords you like to use. So basically we have a few things that make it quite a social object that people who don't know much about software don't know, and I didn't know going into it. One is that software gets old. There's something called legacy code, and if you're not building a new startup from scratch and you're just like, an older company like Middle Tech, which built mapping and navigation technology, you are sometimes 10, 20, 30 years old. And what does that mean? That means that you have code that is old and is aging with you as a company. So the people who are building code are building on top of other people's code. So you have to imagine like an old like Google Doc that you're just kind of like adding to, but you have to make sure that the other sentences in that Google Doc are also like somehow making sense. And sometimes they don't make sense, and you have to kind of what is called refactor them. You have to like update them to use the language that you want to use or whatever, but you still have to work with those sentences. You can't just throw them away. I mean, sometimes you can throw them away, but that is very shaky. Sometimes your system crashes because you throw away a bunch of paragraphs in your Google Doc. Let's just use that metaphor, right? So that's one way where you can imagine, you could even see that Adam wrote this line, Paula wrote this other line, and you can actually look into the like kind of history of the code and see that someone who's not even working at the office anymore has written that section. So this poses a challenge because suddenly you have to work with somebody who's not there, sort of these ghosts of software past, as like sometimes I like to call it. And if you can imagine, sometimes you have to be like, okay, I don't get this, good enough. I'm just going to like finally somehow work with this. I don't fully know what it means, or I don't know fully what it does. Let's just like build on top of this and let's just run this code and see if it crashes. Like fingers crossed it doesn't. You see what I mean? So you can't really fully understand what the layers are underneath you. And as our companies age, which they are, and we're using them constantly, and these types of softwares that are embedded within our system, our whole infrastructure of everything from transport to ticketing systems to you name it, then you can imagine all the years and years of all these ghosts we're working with. So that's the one layer of good enoughness, of sort of the legacy of good enoughness. You have to work with something and you can't be perfect because a lot of complexities are coming into play. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Am I not going too fast? Okay, so that's one way of good enough. Another way is simply that you have teams working on things simultaneously and you have to constantly review each other. I don't know, people don't know that you're kind of code reviewing each other. Again, back to this Google Doc example, you constantly have to review other people's paragraph sentences before pushing out the code. And sometimes, you know how it is, like you just want to go get a beer with your friends, or you have to pick up your kids from school and you just go like, whatever, I'm just going to review it. Plus, you give them a +2. +2 is like the best review. +1 is like you need to fix something. And -1, you need to like ditch it, etc. So there's like a review system. And sometimes you just go, good enough. So that way it's also very social because it's like a peer review, constant peer review of each other's code. And we know as academics, also peer review is sometimes good enough. We're just like, yeah, this could fly. This could be at a journal, right? So that's also, so there's many other ways. I'm not going to get into all of the ways, but you can start seeing that software is extremely social. And I think in social relations are not about excellence. They're about messiness, and they're about like making things work and constantly negotiating, constantly compromising, just like you do with your friends or your neighbors or your parents, right? That we don't have perfect relations. So I think once we start looking at that relational aspect of software, then you start seeing, okay, well, no, it is good enough. Yeah.
I mean, that's a really interesting point too, because it's like, and you touch on this in the book too, but like we have this kind of false idea that software is this pristine thing. It's like code is beautiful architecture, and it's like thought out and fully crafted, right? But your work kind of says, actually, when you dive into it, it actually it's quite as social as a conversation that's kind of being made as we go, built on other languages that we're drawing from,
Totally. Yeah. And if I could just add to that, Adam, another thing that I really learned, and this is where the term good enoughness came from the field, because in engineering, there's a term that's good enoughness, and software engineers have written about good enough software. And also the whole, cloud computing and update culture within the software industry that internet has brought us means that software isn't packaged into a little CD that we put into our hard drive and then it's finished, right? Before you finish software product and then you shipped it in a CD the way we do a book, right? And it's quite static as an object. But here now you can constantly update, and you are constantly getting pings on your phone or on your computer where software is being updated. It's because you're always in a state of good enoughness as an engineer. You're always just going like, this is good enough for now, let's ship it. And then we'll see what happens in the real world and how it reacts to the software, or how software, our legacy code, or many layers react with the actual real world. And then we're going to update it, right? So that even principle of building software is almost built into the logic of how we build software today. You see what I mean? So that good enoughness, if you talk to any engineer, they're like, yeah, obviously everything's good enough. But if you kind of talk to a manager who wants to get a client, they'll be like, no, our software is going to be really great, really robust. We're going to deliver a great product at week, 44. We're doing it. We're pushing it out. You see what I mean? So this is the also incongruency. And I think, that was also a tricky thing about my research with engineers versus my research with management. That's maybe another juicier topic.
I think let's dive into that, because that does seem to be the interesting and important point, where it's like, developers and coders that don't and are not working directly with customers, right? There's a different level of pressure, right? Or a different level of kind of even awareness of they are maybe thinking more sociality or socially within their organization, or with their manager, right? But then it's like an external facing person. And I've worked, on client success side of businesses. I've worked on like internal sides, and it's like, and they're very different, right? Because your language does change. Your thoughts of like, how do I interact with my teammates in relationship with what the customer wants versus I'm just working with my internal team. And so like, that's an interesting tension there of like, how does that play out where good enough doesn't feel like it's good enough to the manager sometimes. Or at least they're not spoken about that way.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so many layers that it's hard for me to organize this in my mind, but I'm going to try. Is that, so one thing is that we're thinking, let's even just talk about like engineers themselves. There's all sorts of different engineers, and the engineers I worked with are quite privileged. They're privileged meaning that a lot of them are research and development engineers, and they're working at like a nice stable company. They are research and development engineers oftentimes like don't have this pressure to push something out at a certain time. And even if they did, there were also other groups that had to, of course, have deadlines. They oftentimes had basically their product has years and years of history, and it's an asset for a lot of let's say it's mainly car companies, but it was a navigation system. So basically it's an asset that's been around for a long time. So it's almost like the client needs them versus they need the client, if you know what I mean. They kind of already have a stable market that there's not much of a huge pressure. I mean, they would have to really mess up to really be fired. They're quite embedded in a lot of systems, so they have to keep it running at good enough speed. Now, got to go back to the engineers. There's other engineers in Kiev, not in Kiev anymore, but Kiev, Krakow, Bangalore, is global south, which were actually doing a lot of the, let's call it dirty work or the fast coding, and they did not have this luxury of good enoughness. So good enoughness can be is a luxury. It's a freedom in many ways to say, this is good enough, I'm going for a beer. You see, that moment, a lot of people think good enough is just about mediocrity and nobody wants to be good enough. But actually, a lot of these engineers are so happy to work in a good enough company because they can say, no, beer time. No, I'm picking up my kid from school. No, I'm going to my kid's recital or whatever. I'm finishing work. Work is not, they're able to do that. They have the freedom to say that. Someone in Bangalore who needs to finish their code reviews or whatever it is that they're doing as an outsourcing company has to finish at a certain time. You see what I mean? So the good enoughness has a privilege, and there's different layers of privilege of depending on what engineer you are, of how much good enoughness you can allow yourself at work. And then the manager question, which is another more, and they don't like the term, of course, they don't like the term good enough. And also a few managers who I spoke to were also, I don't know, they felt kind of hurt by the term good enough, or they thought they saw themselves as like kind of just, I don't know, taking advantage of their workers or like pressuring their workers and not really caring about them. And that's really not what I wanted to get across. But I think it's a tricky thing because the logic of excellence and the logic of, I don't know, corporate work that runs on key performance indicators, for those of us who know that term, or, you have to have metrics that make sure that you have enough bugs being squashed and enough productivity that's happening. All of that logic is there, and you as a manager have to work under that logic. Whether you sit down and listen to your engineers and see, what do you really want? What are you good at? Of course they do that, but then that logic is still bubbling up from underneath. You know what I mean? So I think that was tricky. That was very tricky to like say, hey, good enough is great. And they were like, no, it's not great. And you're making me look stupid, So that was hard.
No, it's interesting too, because it's like there's often that question too. And I mean, in any kind of like power differential in hierarchies, especially at workplaces like this, right? Like, I mean, even like the entire rise of the managerial class, right? Yeah. There's kind of this like built-in resentment a little bit from the worker class that's, usually under the managerial class. Yeah. As a question of why do I need to be managed on the one hand, right? And that's like, in Scrum is one of the methods that we see often in software development, right? Yes. Of that. And that you kind of, the interesting tensions you kind of noted in the book too, were this like the managers saw that as a great way to be able to know what's going on, but then like, you had programmers being like, Scrum is stupid. Like, it doesn't really actually help us get anything done, and it's like, we have to just either have a daily stand up or whatever it is. And it's like this interesting back and forth that's also on one hand, like an interesting kind of forced sociality also, right? Of like, let's be seen and kind of share the work that we have coming up. Not that it's saying Scrum is bad, but just like there's an interesting tension that we do see like different individuals like finding it more or less valuable. Yeah. Where managers kind of more uniformly find something like that helpful, because that's actually what their work is how do we see what's happening in theory,
how
right?
do we make things transparent? That's a huge, definitely that was the huge issue here, is how do we make something transparent? And we have a methodology for that. And for those who don't work in kind of corporate software, there's these methodologies that help, managers organize their tech workers, and one of them is called Scrum or Agile. There's other forms and other ways of doing things, but a lot of engineers would tell you, they would be like, I don't need Scrum, I don't need stand-ups, I don't need this is all for the manager. Whereas the manager would say, that's just like the big-headedness of our engineers talking. They actually do need this, because without this, they'll just be completely lost. So it's really trying to show your legitimacy of, as a worker, that I'm okay without this. And there's this tension that's not a software engineering tension, is a tension in any sort of work struggle, of a power struggle of who has the freedom to choose, right? Who has the freedom to work in a certain way? And what is the manager-worker relation? And you can go back to Marx, you can go back to, I don't know, even, sort of Taylorism, et cetera, and just kind of like map all of these tensions. I'm not somebody who is expert. I'm not doing that fully in this book, but you can see that tension, especially in one of my chapters, play out on I think it's the one on managing software engineers. It's managing good enoughness. It's chapter 4.
Got to manage that good enoughness, But that's, I think this is an interesting point too, because it's like whenever we're kind of working with a workplace hierarchy, there are different kinds of like micro politics that can kind of come in there. It's like that ultimately also shapes the quality of the software, right? Yes. And it's like this interesting idea, because since we have a today it's like nobody's surprised when it's like, oh, you open your computer and it says, oh, want to download an update for some software? Great. You open your cell phone and it asks you the same thing, or it just does it in the background, to the point we don't even notice it sometimes, that's just like part of what we do now.
Yes.
I remember getting the AOL CDs in the mail,
Yes.
as a kid, and it's like this, it's like that transition is so common now. It's like, it feels archaic to even think about that, but it's like a crazy idea to think that, software was printed on a CD and then just passed out. And honestly, like, I know this is not related to the work, but just like, it had me thinking about both the making of books, which we have, and like DVDs and like film that we do. Like, these are also like produced works that do not get continually updated. I mean, you can have a second, third edition of your book, but it's not anywhere as fast as a sprint, for good reason.
Or a TikTok or whatever it is. Yet you don't have this flow, this constant waterfall of information that you're constantly updating. Yeah.
But even like when you're finishing writing a book to write a dissertation or a thesis or anything, or even a paper for your class, if you're doing that, it's like, they're also still like, you probably recognize the good enough feeling, right? It's like, okay, well, I got to turn it in.
Yeah.
No,
but I think good enough, it's funny because when you're writing a book, and I'm sure the authors you've spoke to in the past have identified with this, and we identified this. We write about what we know and we care about. And it's just a bit bizarre, but I kind of realized that just after even just finishing the book, I thought, oh man, my life is very much like lives to the like logic of good enoughness. And it's something I deeply, deeply believe in. And I mentioned this earlier, I don't know if this was off record or on record, but that I'm also a musician and I publish albums, etc. And I tour. And that was a very tricky thing to juggle, being a professional musician and an academic at the same time. And it was always this constant like, this is good enough. This is done. I have to run onto something else. And that's not just original. If you're a parent and you work at the same time, these are two jobs. These are huge jobs that you're doing at the same time. And you always have to go, no, this is good enough for now. I have to pick my kids up from school or whatever, right? So you're constantly in this tension of, this has to be good enough, right? This has to be good enough. There is a deadline. It needs to be finished. So I think that's really important to remember that we're not all excellent. We're not all awesome. And the term good enoughness, by the way, comes from actually sort of pediatrics. And there's the few people in medicine who've actually wrote a paper around the good enough mother and writing about like what it means to be not perfect. And it's actually very healthy to actually talk to mothers as doctors. It was kind of a plea to doctors to really highlight that mothers should not be looked at as excellent, because once you look at yourself as good enough, there's less stress, there's less tension, there's more understanding of yourself, and that's also plays very well on your relationship with your child. You see what I mean? So that understanding, I'm good enough, that's okay, is very freeing and is very relaxing, I guess. And I think that, but again, it's tricky because it's also comes from a space of privilege to do that, right? A lot of people can't do that. They'll lose their jobs. Whatever, it will happen, if you say, I'm just good enough. So I can easily sometimes, that's the critique that comes to me. Okay, I could say that as a professor sitting in Switzerland, doing some research in Berlin among like R&D tech workers, fine, but like go to, a coding farm in, I don't know, wherever, Krakow or something, or not Krakow maybe anymore, but somewhere else, and you'll see that's
Bangalore,
exactly, and you'll see what happens there. You can't just say like, this is good enough, I'm leaving. No, you're gonna lose your job and someone else will take your spot, right? So so that's tough. That's the tough thing, and that's the critique I do get, and I understand that. I want to paint it as it is a reality that I think also is there that we don't talk about even in our very privileged societies,
Yeah, no, I think it's an important part. And like in general too, I think that oftentimes social scientists, we can get, or as social scientists, we can get kind of caught up in the privilege critique, where it's like, well, we shouldn't be talking about something because it's only for a privileged group. And it's like, well, no, we have if we're here to dissect society, we do have to. It's totally fine to talk about that. And like that doesn't make it, to your point, not real or not valid, right? It just means that it's for a certain group.
Sure. Yeah.
And so totally fine there. But just like, but I think it's an interesting point, because I do. We have interesting work to do, I think, as social scientists too, to kind of give ourselves permission sometimes to like both do research in places that are that can be spots of like stated privilege or awareness of privilege. Because I feel like it's like we're not supposed to somehow. And honestly, I think that on one hand also might play into a bit of, I don't know if it's a common, I don't want to say neuroses of social scientists, but just like this concern that we're either not good enough also for the research, right? And or that like as good enough research is like in like the hardest places, right?
Yeah.
Which is, this also false narrative that we have, it's interesting to kind of think about the way that like good enoughness, when you say it and think about it in any profession, like it kind of, you see where it chips at you, either if you have it or you have the privilege to be able to do it or don't. And then you kind of say, well, what am I doing right or wrong in my own area? As I think about that, that's an interesting way it kind of like seeps into you.
Yes. And that's also I think that's the like, I don't know, it has to do with capitalism. It has to do with like this, Nancy Fraser talks about the like crisis of care in capitalism, and that like care, when you start caring, you're not working hard enough. You're stopping and slowing down, right? This is like the notion of slowing down is somehow it doesn't work well in our logic that we are living in, and I think that's difficult. That is the difficulty, and I think that's something that we should definitely remember. And I do this work, and I wrote this book just for people to also look beyond just learning about how software works, but also to understand a little bit, understand themselves in the world. And I did touch somehow my students who I teach at this very elite business school that I sometimes have a huge problem with sometimes being here, at full disclosure, because it's people who are living this like non-good, it's just about excellence, it's about being perfect, being the best, going to a consultancy firm and like winning, you have to be the best of the best. And just to say, actually guys, to say to first year, just beginning first day students, good enoughness is still good, and you there is other spaces that you will find yourself in. You don't have to be excellent, and that's I think really, really important. But one last thing I want to say, maybe, I don't know if we have to slowly wrap up or you have a few more questions, but we're good, yeah. But a thing about also, I have this little anecdote in my conclusion about, one of this goodbye party to a few of the engineers who are leaving to like, the non-good enough companies. They left for the big, huge tech companies, the Googles and the Microsofts and the Facebooks, and they were leaving. And then I kind of met a bunch of engineers who were saying goodbye to them. This was all at like a beer garden in Berlin, and even they asked me what my book was about, and I said, well, it's it's about the greatness of middle tech, because it's really like this space of good enoughness and how good enoughness works. And their hearts sank. They really were like, what, good enoughness? Oh no. And like kind of this comparison of these people who are celebrated, who are leaving, these other workers, they're going to Microsoft, they're going to Google, wow, so wonderful. But I'm staying behind, right? I'm working here for another 15 years already, and I'm still here. This is my good enough job. And so in some ways, it does eat at these tech workers. I want to just say that I'm not painting this sort of story of everyone being like, yeah, we have such a good job because we could just coast around and freeload and like be good enough all the time. It is a tension within them. It's exactly that tension that you're talking about, Adam, that affects all sorts of different people in different workforces, that they are also struggling with this term, that this is hard for them, that they want to be at Microsoft sometimes because this logic, these forces of post-industrial capitalism work against this logic. So they're part of this logic. We all feel that, So I just want to say that I felt that among my engineers very much so too, that the struggle.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And I appreciate you bringing that up too, because you can totally see on the one hand how the idea can feel uncomfortable because it, even like on the one hand, like if you're in a certain working environment, socioeconomic class, you will lose your job if you don't do work that's good enough. But then also if you're in a more privileged class, or even just more like entrenched middle class, it feels like you're not doing enough. The enough part, ironically, if you're just good enough, like you feel like I should be more excellent or more better. And so it does show us it's always kind of pulling us upwards regardless. And that's like an interesting challenge point that like, I think why it's such an effective kind of lens through which to think about, software development. But I think to this point, like the bigger question about how we do work in like late in post-capitalism, post-industrial capitalism,
yes, exactly.
not post-capitalism, we're not there yet.
Yes, exactly. What the future of like labor is and how this, how is this, like what potential for emancipation is there? Is there any? And is this one form of sort of micro emancipation outside of this? I don't know. It's really, I don't have an answer really, unfortunately, that. I don't know if, I also know that middle tech is going to be replaced. It's not going to stay forever. And I think middle tech will be subsumed by these different challenges and of, different experiences. I think even an example, not that I've studied Twitter or X, but another example when Elon Musk comes in and swoops in and kind of fires hundreds and hundreds of tech workers. That's a total example of wait, why is Twitter still working, or why is X still working after all these hundreds of workers were fired? Well, it has a lot to do with time and ways in which these engineers were embedded, and of course a good enough culture, I think, that comes out in different companies. And it doesn't have to just be a medium-sized company in Berlin. There's also good enough culture exists, as I also write, at the Googles, at the Facebooks, at the X's, etc. But then there are the Elon Musks that come in what were these people doing? Out with them, right? So, and I think that middle tech be either bought out by another company, and then, somehow. And we see also, this is also another maybe looking at the future. My next project is on how engineers are dealing with different tools, AI tools like ChatGPT, but also Copilot, etc. And this is going to be a huge wave. It's already starting to really affect how engineers do their work and how software engineers organize. So there'll be a lot of redundancies. People will be fired because, the AI can do their job. So that also is going to be tricky of how good enoughness will be challenged and stabilized through the kind of production. I've even been someone tried to hire me. This is so funny. They didn't read my book. They wrote me an email, Adam, last week. That was so funny. They were like, "Hi, we're from a large software company. I'm not going to say their name, and we would love it if you could do some work on how to up the efficiency of our workers, given ChatGPT." I mean, they read that I do some work on AI, and they're like, "Because we heard that AI can really up the efficiency of our software production." And I was like, "Man, did you not read my book?" I guess you didn't. Yeah, exactly. Anyways,
that's funny. Yeah. Well, congratulations on getting pitched for work. Yeah, but that's a funny point though. You're like, exactly. you missed the entire human side of the work.
And, I'm not going to help you be more efficient. No, I want you to be good enough. Yeah.
But I think that's a really interesting point, because I was curious, and I am curious about that, because I know because you're doing this research in 2016, 17, 18, but obviously AI is now mainstream. GitHub has their Copilot. You mentioned, Microsoft also ironically has titled Copilot. Lazy titling, guys.
I wanted it to be called Code Pilot. I always thought it was going to be called. Wasn't that
way
better?
You're right.
Code Pilot. Come on, guys, play on words. And I thought, really, gosh, okay.
Yeah. Where's the developer pun here? That's a great point.
Anyway, sorry.
But these things, yes, you're right. No, not at all. But how that also adds to the challenge of redundancies of kind of work, but then shifting the nature of work itself. And I do think that's a fundamentally important question. Yeah. Because it's I've been thinking about this too, because it's the first, at least consumer side applications of AI, came, I think, for the kind of weird areas, right? It helps with creative writing, it helps with image generation, it can do music stuff. And it can do coding. And it's why are we targeting, not, I don't know if it's on purpose or not, consumer facing things that are creative enterprises versus let's automate traffic stops to be more efficient. It's this interesting idea of what the consumer uses of AI were pitched towards, versus actually we talk about, it's going to help remove drudgery. It's all of us would probably, many of us have used some sort of generative AI to either help us put a paragraph together or correct a sentence or a few ideas. And then and everything comes out I would say is below good enough.
Good enough. Yeah, mediocre. Definitely.
Because it's the average of the internet. So it's not going to be great. But so I guess I'm curious, your thoughts on this too, both as a musician and as a researcher. It's it's curious to me, what the consumer applications are or the enterprise applications, because it's also, this is how do we help improve efficiency across the development pipeline? And it's funny because it's a technological solution to something that's a social problem. Right? And actually you say this somewhere too, that's part of the point of your work is to help us be we we can't be using new technology to solve old technology problems because they don't do that.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how these work, especially when they're social problems. So
yeah,
what does that bring up in your
what
brain?
does that bring up? Gosh, yeah, it's hard to say, and also why these creative realms are being tackled. Like, I think that I don't know. Maybe this is just me thinking that this is like non-creative people trying to capture forms of creativity and like hone them for themselves so that they can be creative. Maybe because and once you see like engineers, once I did a little pilot study and I looked at how engineers are using Copilot, and which is, for those who don't know, like the AI owned by Microsoft and one of the main AI tools in coding. And it really was it's always in the non-creative moments, or the very, like, let's even not call them non-creative, like the very mundane and very mechanical things that actually it's good at. But the creativity of really like designing something well, or trying to understand how to refactor a whole section of your piece of software that you're building, you kind of have to like be a bit you have to be a bit creative, and you have to there is a human aspect that's about planning, right? About trying to figure out how the repercussion of what you're building will look like in the future, and look at all sorts of different contingencies that an AI sometimes doesn't, at least yet, doesn't understand how to do that. And it's a little bit with also music. When you come to understand, when you start listening to AI generated music, I find musicians do see the difference. A lot of non-musicians kind of are like, no, I don't see the difference to this. But I think in the long run, the way in which music stays with you, and the way in which it like becomes part of your sort of soul, and you sing the lyric, and you want it to be with you for a long, long time. When you hear a good piece of music that you really like, then that has to be created by somebody that touches you some way, I think. So I feel more that when stuff needs to stay for a longer period of time and be there with us and kind of touch us in some way, that could also be robust software that makes sense for all sorts of systems and whatever, all sorts of hardware and whatever it is you're building. You have to have a way in which you can plan that and understand its longevity. Does that make any sense? So I would say that like that ability to like make something stay is not really yet there with AI, and I don't think it could be. I don't know if that made any sense.
Yeah. I love. I mean, it's like it speaks a bit to the idea of stickiness. What's going to make something stay. There's actually there's a quote I want to read from your book. To get to like, as part of, I know, right? It's fancy sounding, because it really stood out to me, because it like speaks to these, and it actually, this is now it was in my head because this is where it has the idea of like new and old technology. But it speaks to a lot of the ideas that we've been talking about so far, and this comes like right before you're afterward. And basically, it's, you say, so while our past was rooted in expansion and the demand for bigger, better, and greater, it is my hope that the skills and tactics of good enoughness will be necessary to build a livable future. Resistance to narratives of capitalism can include care, compromise, balance, safety, contentment, and collegiality. And knowing how to be good enough can give us the skill to maintain our infrastructures and keep them running and stable. Accepting a good enough work culture can be productive as it leaves time for the realignment of power relations, the reconfiguration of what is important at a given moment. And while I aim to illustrate the overarching need for managers, workers, and software users to accept the inherent bugginess and lethargy of working in technical systems, it's really my hope to get us out of the mindset that traps us into thinking that new technology will save us from the old one. And doing so can help us embrace endurance over newness and maintenance over repair, over quick innovation, and prepare us for a highly adversarial world that is to come. Ton of good stuff there. So thank you, because that encapsulated, I think, such the import of this work. And so something else you're saying, that there's the stickiness from the AI that's not quite there, but then also this idea of like we're so obsessed by the shiny object that like our roads are crumbling. It's like we don't actually think there's no value. We don't place sexiness on maintenance and endurance, but like that's really what makes the world work.
Yes,
right?
Definitely.
So I can go to work.
Yes.
To invent the new thing.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I could add anything. I think that's one of my last sentences. Was that like the last part of my conclusion? It was
right before the afterward. So it's towards the end.
Yeah. So I really tried to like craft this, this conclusions of the conclusion. And yeah, I think I don't know how to add to that, basically, because
Oh, you
I
already
was
said it,
like,
which is good.
wow, I wrote that. That's nice. When you write something, you're like, oh, that's cool, actually.
Like, yeah, that's pretty good.
Maybe I'll
No, it is.
cringe in 5 years, but I'm still not cringing, I guess.
I hope not. No, I mean, no, because I think that was beautifully written, and like that's, I mean, it stuck out enough that I wanted to read it, because I think there's so much here in terms of, like, to our point we're talking about, there is this dialogue between care versus speed, right?
Yes.
Or like working versus care,
Yeah.
and like that's the Nancy Fraser moment that you mentioned before,
Yeah.
the tension between those ideas. But then also, I like this idea of good enoughness, because we've been talking a lot about it, how it's like it feels a little cringy to the software developers or managers.
Yes.
But here you're kind of saying it's actually a skill
Yes.
in a work environment to think about, and like in how we think about operating and setting up our world. And you point out again here, the value of that is that because it actually helps us think about things like endurance
Yeah.
and maintenance and keeping things going, right?
Yes.
Versus just like what's next, what's new.
Yes.
And AI, I think, has that exact problem, right? It's always about what's next and what's new, and not like, let's make sure things actually work.
That's true. That's interesting. I would be another people who are interested in this area. You could look into Andy Russell's and Lee Vinzel's work on maintenance and repair. There's this like group of people called the maintainers. That's a kind of network of I don't know. You probably had experience. Did you
Cool name.
Yeah, the maintainers, and they're like researchers and advocates for people that care about a well-maintained world. I guess that's their like mission statement. So it's cool. You could check out their work. And I think that there are a lot of people just really trying to put our focus away from the shiny and new. You can look about like the degrowth movement and sustainability studies, and like just trying to, it is quite hopefully about sustainability is really this idea. Although good enoughness can come off as like sloppiness too. That's another, and that's the thing that I haven't really I see that there's a problem in that notion, and I still haven't figured it out, because on one hand it's about care and about maintenance, but it's, when I talk about it, sometimes about compromise, right? Saying like, I can't care enough about this anymore. I have to go, right? I need to compromise on the quality of this because I have to do something else. So the well-maintenance also about slowness and slowing down, and sometimes good enoughness is about moving fast. But it's not about moving fast because you want to like build the newest, shiniest app. It's like really about moving fast because you don't fully have time to care about this. You have to care about something else. And that could be about your own well-being, your being a good friend, being a good mother, being a good boyfriend, whatever it is that you want to also care about. You see what I mean? So it's about like that shift that we're constantly doing, that's not only about work. We are a multiple of things, right? So anyways, so I hope that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's like, it encapsulates that idea that like, the original use of the word economics, like Greek oikos, is actually for managing one's home. Right. And so it's like reminds us that work is like, it's the work-life balance, fake idea, right? That like they're somehow separate. And it's like, no, we have to always manage all of them.
Yes, that's very
work
true.
and life.
Of course.
Yeah. So I think that's a great point too, where it's like, but also a good question that you raised in there too. So if listeners, watchers, if anything jumps to your mind in terms of this idea of like, is there a tension or challenge with this idea that good enoughness also feels sloppy? How do we think about that, right? Because I think you're right, where it's like it can be moving quickly, it can be moving slowly, it can be moving with care for one thing or with care for a lot of things, and that then like and depending on how you're looking at it, right, that could feel sloppy, but it can also feel like super efficient depending on So it's like it is about a point of view too, I think, in terms of both in intent of what's one trying to accomplish, and also what does someone else seeing said person trying to accomplish in that moment. So I think there's it's always a 3D moving piece, right? It's like always going to be kind of one person's sloppy is another person's efficiency. But I hear you in terms of like is there a way to talk about what's happening here that captures like, but that still also feels good, because it seems like good enoughness, we have to like get to the point of saying, good enough's actually okay, good enough is good, right? Because you feel like it's like, no, so there's an interesting tension there,
exactly,
of what that is, because you're right, because overall it's actually a positive thing.
But for a lot of people it's a lot of people it's not positive, it's not enough. This tension between the term good, the word good, and the word enough, and it's constantly, is it enough? No, it's not enough. For some people it is enough. For me it's good enough. For others it's not enough. This is funny, and yeah, I don't have an answer that I think we're constantly going to be like jumping between unless we like, yeah, I think really slow down maybe, I don't know, or really, I don't know. I think this is like moves into also like sort of self-help territory. And Avram Alpert wrote a book also called Good Enough. That's more about like the good enough term from as a philosopher. He wrote a book. It's also out with Princeton University Press. So I also recommend checking that out if you're interested in the term good enough in our life as a sort of philosophy. And so it's not an ethnography. He's not an anthropologist, but also maybe worth checking out.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. Hey, we're okay with all sorts of thinkers on the show.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. We'll give social scientists
exactly.
the stage.
I'm also a bit. So I'm trained more in sociology. So am I really anthro? I don't know. But yeah, my partner's an anthropologist, and he told me that it's a joke if you spend like 2 weeks in a field. So I really learned the beauty of very long-term field work, where you kind of very much feel your whole body within the field. And I really bow my hat to like all anthropologists who spend a long time in the field.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's funny because I will say on the flip side that like I both like that, but also I really value people that are able to do rapid ethnography, and like they're able to do it quickly, because it's like, because the work demands like they both are valuable, and we have to do both, right?
Yeah, that's true. And some some anthropologists can't say, okay, this is good enough. They keep going, but I think that's also true that there's something for the one to each their own, and one has a purpose in the other as well, and the one can uncover a lot that others can't. So that's also interesting too. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. No, hey, holism, it all works together. You know, it's like, I mean, I would say 50% of the time on the show, I'm the only anthropologist, and that's on purpose, actually.
Okay.
This is like,
so it's
because the point is like, how do we get other thought leaders and folks interested in social sciences, and so that's so this is why.
You're the anthropologist of social scientists.
I sometimes, I guess sometimes I am. Yeah.
The Anthro Life is your Anthro Life. It should be
sometimes it's mine.
Adam's
sometimes
life.
it's yours.
It's true.
Yeah. Adam's Life. Not as catchy as a title, I guess.
Adam's Anthro Life.
Adam's Anthro Life.
Nice.
Al,
exactly.
You know.
Cool.
I mean, there's always more, that too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Does it work? Who knows? But cool, Paula, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you hopping on, and I'm excited to get the book into the eyes and ears of audience members. So we'll have a link to it in the show notes.
Lovely.
And yeah, so I'm excited to see what you'll come up with, obviously, in the AI space after this, and see how that goes. It's kind of scary, but I think interesting.
Yeah. It was really nice talking to you, and you're such a great listener, and I really like listening to your podcast because you really read our books, which is crazy, and a lot of people don't do that, and it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Cool. Well, many thanks. And we'll see you soon.
Take care. Happy reading.
And that's a wrap on today's discussion with Paula Bialski on the nuances of good enough in software development and beyond. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today, Paula. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you. We journeyed through the complexities of maintaining balance, care, and compromise in the fast-paced world of technology and development. This conversation not only sheds light on the tangible aspects of coding culture and workplace dynamics, but also invites us to rethink our relationship with the never-ending pursuit of excellence. As we close this episode, let's carry forward the idea that sometimes being good enough doesn't signify mediocrity, but a mindful acknowledgement of our limits and priorities, both in our professional and personal lives. So thank you for tuning in. I hope this has sparked some reflections on how we can navigate these demands of our increasingly digital world. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next episode. I'm Adam Getwell, and you're watching This Anthro Life.